I'm honored to be here today to talk to the community. It's a great opportunity, and I appreciate being able to take it. I want to thank my wife and children, and Alex De La Mata. Thanks for supporting me on this. So I am Joe Aletti. I'm an acquisition officer in the U.S. Air Force. And for those that know me, they know I love telling a good story. Today's story is one of my favorite topics, acquisitions, lessons learned. And so typically lessons learned in the acquisition community come in two flavors. There's the successful programs that deliver capability on time, on budget, they're able to innovate rapidly or focus a highly skilled, motivated workforce on a particular problem set. And the other flavor is the program that, for whatever reason, whether a series of unfortunate events or a singular moment in their life cycle, failed to deliver capability on time or on schedule. And both of these flavors come in DoD and non-DoD varieties. Well, the Simple Sabotage Handbook is unique because it was written specifically to undermine innovation, specifically to decrease productivity, and to generally slow production, slow progress overall. And so for that reason, I think it's worth taking a look at. The story starts in World War II at the height of Nazi territorial expansion. At this point in the war, the Nazis controlled most of mainland Europe and northern Africa. Now, among this diverse population were those that were willing to resist the regime. They didn't agree with the policies, they didn't agree with the occupation, so they were willing to resist. So they needed to be helped and pushed along by the Allies. Well, the good folks of the OSS, which was the predecessor to the CIA, so I'm just going to say CIA from now on, the good folks of the CIA realized that these people, this potential pool of saboteurs, existed on a spectrum. And at one end of the spectrum were those who were trained, possibly through the military, possibly through other activities, to use explosives or to handle firearms. And they could harass the Germans with bombing bridges or slowing down convoys, that kind of thing. But at the other end of the spectrum was the ordinary citizen. And these were the factory workers, these were the school teachers, the transit employees, the government employees. There were those among them that didn't agree with the Nazis and were willing to resist. And so the CIA realized that they could engage that entire spectrum, that they could get that entire spectrum working to resist the Nazi war machine, that overall the war machine would increase in resistance to the point where it was dragged down, and these little resistances would add up in the big scheme of things. And so what I like to think happened is that these folks at the CIA, you know, there were some junior grade and maybe some mid-grade folks that got, sat around the conference table, maybe some military folks in there. And the boss comes in and tells them, okay, boys, this is what you're going to do. You're going to develop a simple sabotage handbook for the ordinary citizen that won't require specialized training or detailed plans in order to execute these acts of simple sabotage. And so the boss leaves, and this group of people go about bantering back and forth about how they're going to do this. And the Joker pipes up and says, well, you know, all we got to do is get those Nazis to have more meetings like our Monday morning staff meeting. You know, the machine will grind to a halt, and the war will be over in a week, because it's a waste of time, and if we can get them to do that, then we'll be in business. And everyone laughs, and they have a good time, and they start feeding off of each other and start ragging on their boss or other supervisors they've had, or policies, or even the DC traffic. And so somebody in the back, I like to imagine that they were jotting all this down, and they looked up from the paper and they said, I know you guys are all joking, but I think we're onto something here. And so from there, the conversation cascades to a variety of bureaucratic frustrations. Things like the train employee issuing 2 tickets for the same seat, or the clumsy mail clerk who delays delivery of a parcel by a whole day simply by putting it in the wrong sack. Or trying to go to the motor pool, and there aren't any cars available because the mechanic broke the tool, and now they got to wait for that tool to come in, so they can't work on any of the cars. And so you see how all these little things could be grouped by the workplace. And so they started to organize by work center. Okay, well, these ideas are for factories, and these ideas are for office spaces, and these ideas are for transportation. And at the end of that process, they had a chapter full of examples from across the board, from across these wide variety of workplaces. And so that's the last chapter of the book. The first part of the book, the first couple of chapters, focus on three things. And I want to be clear here because there's a couple of pieces that I want to reiterate. The first topic was that simple sabotage is based on universal opportunities to make faulty decisions and universal opportunities to adopt non-cooperative attitudes. These activities are responsible for accidents, delays, and general obstructions even under normal circumstances. And I want to repeat that. These activities, so the faulty decisions, the non-cooperative attitudes, these activities are responsible for accidents, delays, and general obstructions even under normal circumstances. The second topic was that acts of simple sabotage that require no destructive tools and produce little to no physical damage can produce damage by highly indirect means. So they can produce damage by highly indirect means. Acts by thousands of citizen saboteurs can be an effective weapon against the enemy. Acts by thousands of citizen saboteurs can be an effective weapon against the enemy. These are things like slashing tires, starting fires, but also starting arguments and acting stupidly. They actually put that in the book. Starting fires, slashing tires, starting arguments, and acting stupidly. That's in the book, that's in there. Acts like these occurring on a large scale will be a constant and tangible drag on the war effort, and at the very least will frustrate and demoralize administrators and police. Large scale, constant and tangible drag on the war effort, and at the very least will frustrate and demoralize administrators and police. The third topic was how to motivate and reorient the possible saboteur. Their minds would have to be reprogrammed to think differently. Instead of keeping your tools sharp, keep them dull. Act lazily and carelessly. That's not a native state of mind for most people, so you have to retrain the saboteur to act and think that way. Foster a state of mind that anything can be sabotaged. Foster a state of mind that anything can be sabotaged. I can spill the coffee, sabotage. I can create a traffic incident by running a red light or not going on a green light, sabotage. Foster a state of mind that anything can be sabotaged. So with those three things, that's the first part of the book. The last part of the book was that chapter on examples. Bam, we've got our handbook. High fives all around, boys. Let's go get drinks. They classified the book and distributed it secretly among the German territories. And it came with the warning that these contents should be closely guarded and should not fall into unauthorized hands. So the contents of this book and all those examples were considered dangerous information. It was dangerous to have the enemy get their hands on this book and these ideas and to think that we were sabotaging them in this fashion. So I'll give you a few of my favorite examples from the last chapter of the book that deal with organizations, meetings, managers, and employees. For meetings, it was recommended that if a decision had been made previously, that decision should be reopened and the merits rediscussed at the next meeting. For organizations, it was recommended that no individual should ever make a decision. All decisions should be referred to a committee of no less than 5. For managers, you were to promote and reward those employees with a known history of poor performance. This would decrease productivity by decreasing the morale of the surrounding workers. And finally, for employees, act slowly. Act slowly. Contrive as many excuses to interrupt your day as possible. Do poor work and blame it on poor tools or equipment or processes, and blame those things for the poor work you're doing. Now remember, these sound silly, but these were considered highly dangerous. It was classified. It was distributed discreetly and secretly throughout the Nazi territory. And so the story picks up a little bit from here. After the war, Americans go back to their day jobs in the private sector, and I'm convinced that some of these folks that were sitting around that conference table at the CIA picked up their things and made their way to Lockheed, and from there made their way to the Skunkworks, where they simply executed the opposite of what they had just written in this handbook all those years ago. Skunkworks had made a reputation for itself by creating complex, highly effective military aircraft under cost and under budget. And they did this by utilizing the Skunkworks method, which was actually developed by Kelly Johnson and Ben Rich, the first two directors of Skunkworks. But it was a culture of innovation and a culture that they created and maintained. A few of my favorite tenets of the Skunkworks method are things like the program manager should be delegated complete control of the aspects of the programs within the purview, to include technical, financial, schedule, and operations decisions. Reporting and reports should be minimized at all costs. High performers should be promoted and recognized for their work. And most importantly, you should never tolerate mediocrity. The non-performers should be told what they're doing wrong. So there's no shortage of examples of these two methods at work in present day, but I want to focus on three up on the board. So we have one from Elon Musk, where a couple years ago, Tesla was having problems meeting the production goals of the Model 3, and there was an email that was leaked from Elon Musk himself that was providing guidance that looked awfully familiar. And you could argue that it was either Skunkworks ideas or simple sabotage, but at the end of the day, in either case, he was trying to increase the production, increase the productivity of his factories, and so he was encouraging people to cancel large meetings and to, the headline was, Elon Musk tells people to walk out of meetings and hang up phone calls, that kind of thing. But that's what he was doing. So he was instituting these ideas in his culture. Two other examples I want to go over are the Mars Climate Orbiter and Flint, Michigan. Now, the Mars Climate Orbiter was being built by a number of different contractors, but the Jet Propulsion Laboratory was working on the navigation system, and Lockheed was working on the space vehicle. Well, JPL, their system was expecting as an input the metric system, metric measurements, metric units, and Lockheed system was outputting Imperial. So they were not getting, there was a mismatch in the units. Long story short, it gets to Mars and it crashes on entry. So through highly indirect means can create physical damage. Flint, Michigan, the city decided to change the source of the water supply. The city managers were supposed to add a corrosive inhibitor to prevent the lead that was already in the pipes from leaking out and getting into the water supply. Well, they failed to they failed to add the inhibitors, and lead made it into the water supply. So again, we see these ideas at work. Now, I'm not aware of any kind of criminal intent in either one of these cases, but you can see how these simple sabotage methods, simple sabotage examples are at work in these two. My point is that the Russians or the Chinese don't need to train a Manchurian candidate to be an assassin, but they'd be better served by training somebody to be a DC Metro employee that creates an accident in rush hour traffic, or some kind of a senior level acquisition official who derails a major tanker acquisition because they try to bribe the contractor and secure jobs to their friends and family. Things like that, that would really muck up, acquisitions in general. So the question is, well, where do we go from here? Well, we live in the defense acquisition landscape, and we need to engage and empower that whole spectrum of the acquisition workforce, right? So for us, we have the 75-year-old B-52 engineer with 74 years of experience on the B-52 on one end of the spectrum, and we have these nerds in hoodies in these innovation hubs on the other end. And so what we need to do is adopt the mentality that it's not just the innovators and the gee-whiz bang and the cool guys on the right-hand side that we need to help and facilitate and empower. We need to empower and engage that whole spectrum, because if we're able to do that, then the resistances in the system, in the defense acquisition community, overall will lower, and overall we'll see that we have an improved system, an improved process for everybody. If we neglect that program office level, right, there's still a need for it. We still have a requirement. I don't see innovation hubs running the sustainment on the B-52 anytime soon, nor do they want to, right? They want to get those hard questions, those hard problems that they can attack rapidly. So we need everybody on the spectrum operating at their peak game, and we need to engage and empower all of them. Communities like this are great, and we need to continue to expand and grow this kind of community with new ideas, new ways of thinking. But I think most important, we need to foster the mindsets that everything can be improved. So everything can be improved. So that's all I have for today. I think I'm going to be able to give some time back, but unless there are any questions. I've got a couple of backup slides with lists of the other sabotage examples relating to Office, as well as some of the Skunkworks method items. So any questions for me?
How do we attack ourselves?
Yeah, good question. I think, again, the education, right, the education aspect, the engagement, the empowerment aspect. In the defense acquisition community, you go to DAU, Defense Acquisition University, you get your training. But what else are we doing? What are we doing to foster that environment, foster that mindset that everything can be improved? You have the receptionist who thinks that her job's unimportant because all she does is answer phones. And it's like, no, your job is important. Everyone here is important because you answer the phones. You free up the time for the colonel to focus on all these innovation efforts that are knocking down his door so that he can make an informed decision, so that he doesn't have to rush and simply make a decision based on some 30-second elevator pitch. He can actually think and sit and simmer. All the while, she's answering the phones. That's fantastic. We need you. We need more of you. So we need to let everybody know that they're all value added. Just like in the Nazi territories, right? Even the janitor, janitorial work was mentioned in the book. Janitors can leave gas lamps on. They can stash more combustible materials in the corner than they normally would have. Mechanics, right? You can dull tools. You can break parts that are high demand, low density, such that you have to order them, right? So everybody had a part to play in the sabotage of Nazi Germany. And I think everybody has a part to play in the sabotage of the bureaucracy. And so, something like an acquisition symbol sabotage handbook, where you can, again, get after the bureaucracy and the slowness, if you will, rather than getting after the progress. This one up here. Yeah, that was a good question. I like that one.
Would you mind asking one more?
Okay, thank you.
So in the operational communities and a lot of other support communities, they run war games. So what types of war games do you run in the acquisition community to develop the antibodies necessary?
So I love the question. This was not a staged question, I promise. But my current position, I'm at the National Reconnaissance Office. In my last office, I was actually in the System Engineering Directorate, where we provided the NRO support to war games, mostly space war games, but others as well. And so my office and my team put a lot of brainpower behind how do we develop an acquisition war game? How do we develop that war game that tells us in year 0, where I have this much money and this much capability, and I want to get to year 10, but I don't know what's going to happen in the future. And it's an uncertain future. I don't know what the risks will be. I don't know what the threats will be. It's an ever-changing threat environment. In 1999, we thought the world was going to be a different place than we did in 2002. So how do you account for those that uncertainty. And so what's fascinating about the war game community is that there's not a very good way to, I guess, institute or institutionalize lessons learned, right? So what I saw in my personal experience was that I go to a war game in spring, and it'd be, you know, an Army war game. And then they would have these conditions and these assumptions, and they run their war game, they get these lessons. And then I'd go in the summer to an Air Force war game, and they'd have these conditions, and they get the lessons learned, and et cetera, et cetera. They're all the same lessons learned, and they don't share across the community, they don't communicate, and worse yet, in individual games themselves, you know, in the Army, Navy, Air Force, et cetera, they don't even learn from year to year. And so they document all these great lessons learned, provide all these recommendations. Maybe one or two will be a topic for discussion among senior leaders. Maybe one or less will be taken as an action, and then 1 or 0 will be actually implemented and make the force better. I think as a DoD, we need to relook at how we're doing that. I think exercise and war game get conflated a lot these days because you have to do the linguistic gymnastics to make it sound like it's something different so you can avoid the rules. So if I have a war game, it's these rules. If I have an exercise, it's these rules. But typically we have people who are used to exercises that are participating in war games, and they're not the same, but they're conflated because it's actually called, you know, this event is called an experiment, not a war game or an exercise. And so all that stuff, right, where we don't capture lessons learned, we don't learn from ourselves, we don't learn from each other, we conflate the meaning to execute the process that we want to do. All of that, I would suggest, is us hurting ourselves. We're sabotaging ourselves. We need to take a look and say, no, okay, what are we doing here? How can we improve this process at the individual level? And then that's the bare minimum. If you're unable to affect any other change, you need to be able to affect change at the lowest level, because even that, right, the thousands of acts of citizen saboteurs starting fires and acting stupidly had an effect on the Nazi war machine. And so, again, effects at the low level, multiplied by thousands, has an effect on our DoD acquisition process and our wargaming process. So, good question.
Hi. I was kind of struck when you had the first slide and you were explaining the core principles of the Sabotage Handbook. And this is kind of like a sidebar question. You know, I was struck by how those tenets are, you know, in play today when you look at cybersecurity and how the Russians have used, you know, cyber means to essentially sabotage the West, you know, and other means. And I was just curious, do you think that that the Chinese and the Russians have sort of flipped that handbook and have used those same principles that are almost 80 years old at this point, you know, and they haven't really changed?
Yeah, I would undoubtedly. So what I love about the World War II document era is that they have so many of these manuals that were documented and still around today, and so many of them are still prevalent, still applicable. My brother and I listen to Jocko Willick's podcast. He does a lot of motivational speaking, leadership development, that kind of stuff. But one of the things he does commonly on his podcast is read from either current or legacy, you know, old military doctrine or military leadership guides. And it's fascinating because in 1945, right, 1943, 45, that kind of stuff, you have these Army and Marine Corps documents that say, like, hey, it's not very effective as a leadership method to yell at people. What you need to do is get their buy-in, right? And to tell them why. Tell them why you want them to do something, and they'll surprise you with how they do it, right? So just like the Sabotage Handbook, it's still applicable today. Because I think that human nature doesn't necessarily change, right? But everything is cyclical. So in the past, we were forced to innovate because of World War II and the Cold War and the space race. We hit a lull in the past, I would argue, 30 years after the fall of the Soviet Union. We didn't really need to innovate that much. And so now we're on that, I think, uptick of realizing that, no, okay, this is kind of a Cold War 2.0, space race 2.0 kind of thing, and that now there's this desire to swing back to those old ways of doing things. And that's why I love everything I've heard this weekend, and I agree with most of what I've heard, but it's familiar, right? Because you can read it in these documents going back 70 years. It's nothing new. It's a new wrapper. It's a new term. You know, it's this instead of that. But at the end of the day, it's all very similar. So it's just human nature. Yeah, thank you. All right.